welcome to another episode. Today we're going to talk about gender, genders, what's out there, and basically what all of them mean. Something that for a community you're going to encounter but not necessarily really talk about is genders, preferred pronouns, what people prefer to be called, referred to, and in the furry community it gets a little bit more difficult. Sometimes someone may identify as one gender out of suit, but their suit may have its own gender because it's a specific character with a backstory, yada 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 yada. You don't want to hear about that right now, but one thing I did want to quickly mention is throughout this video I will be expressing my opinion quite a bit. So if we disagree, which is very likely to happen, please feel free to Please feel free to give your opinion in the comments below. I do appreciate all the feedback you guys give me. And at any rate, let's go ahead and get started with genders and, my thoughts on them. Okay, so the basics. So since you're little, you probably understood genders as boys and girls. That's pretty common for most people. Typically, genders were very directly correlated with sex, or, what you got downstairs. And in many cases, we're traditionally taught to think of just boys and girls. Masculine, feminine, those are the only two, end of story. Now, enter the internet, enter a lot of scientific discussion, and enter the ability to more freely express opinions online, and that has shifted quite a bit. Now, I do understand that there are instances of intersex people, and that is kind of the anomaly here, but if you were going to, a traditional school, you would probably learn that, boys are boys, girls are girls, girls have a bathroom, boys have a bathroom, end of story. However, more recently, we've been looking into more interesting approaches to defining gender. You might be born sexually male, but it's entirely possible now that you could more closely identify as a female gender. Essentially, the big differentiation there is gender and sex not necessarily being an indication or directly correlating with one another. And that's completely normal. So, whereas some people on the internet might try to tell you there are only two genders, and if you are trans, you're confused, or, this idea that, you're born male but feel female is wrong, has kind of been more closely examined by both psychologists, people in the scientific field, and people at large. One of the great things the internet has given us the ability to do is more closely scrutinize things that we have been taught as children, which may have evolved since we graduated from school. So essentially, where the basics of gender start to differentiate is that male and female concept and how it fits into modern society and how it's evolved since then. Now, genders can be much, much broader than that. You can be female, you can be male, you can be trans, you can be trans female, you can be trans male, you could even be non-binary. You could be a whole host of different genders in today's society, and that's totally cool. And there is significant research to indicate that it's not a load of bupkis because, we're learning new things about our brains every day. We're learning a whole bunch about our bodies and our minds, and that's really cool. Now, a more old school topic that we have been taught to think about is sexuality. And this one gets a bit tricky. Traditionally, if you were raised in a very religious family, you probably think of heteronormative. Basically, people who like other people of a different gender. You've been usually taught to see the mommy and the daddy. Not necessarily the daddy and the daddy and the mommy, or the non-binary parent and the non-binary parent. It's complicated. Traditionally, I was raised to believe that, there was a mommy, there was a daddy, and typically they have two kids. I think a lot of us were raised with that in mind. However, in today's society, that kind of gets a little bit weird. You know, you do have heterosexual people who do like opposite genders, but you also have homosexual people who like people of the same sex or gender. But it's been a little bit more interesting recently. I, until recently, identified myself as bisexual. I still kind of do, because I feel like what I'm attracted to is a lot tied to gender expression. I do like both gender expressions, but I do find that I could very easily be attracted to someone who is non-binary or, you know, does not define themselves with terms that are accepted. But you have essentially straight, gay, bisexual. But in today's world, you have more discussions around pansexual, which has been thought to be a more inclusive term of the traditional idea of bisexual. And then you have a whole host of other ones, which I will list along the bottom here, which encompass a whole host of different ways to express sexuality. Now, some of them, I will admit, I don't fully understand. I do think it's essentially coining a new word for something that already exists. But in many cases, with people, you know, learning more about their gender expression, that will obviously influence more of their sexuality and their sexual preference, and that's okay. And it's cool that we're able to discover all these new ones, and, you know, until recently, we hadn't really thought about it, which is really neat. And with the exception of TUMBLR, oh no. So yeah, with TUMBLR, a lot of the ways we were talking about and sharing and discovering and learning these new genders and sexuality, TUMBLR has taken that and made it a bit interesting. While it is great that we have been able to learn about all these new genders and all these new sexualities and explore these new terms and, you know, kind of look at these new expressions, TUMBLR has almost made the process of discovering your gender and sexuality a meme, which is sad because, you know, while I do agree that there definitely are more than two genders and there's more than one way to define a sexuality, the way that TUMBLR has done it has really done a disservice to that whole discovery process, because it seems like, at least on TUMBLR, there is a new word for something that already exists every single day, and the way that people react to critical thinking, to these ideas, has become cringy. It's understandable that if you're treading in new territory in an established field like gender, sexuality, science, psychology, you're gonna get some critical reaction from others. When we were still just learning about some of these more open and trans terms, not everyone is going to get it. Now, the way to correctly educate someone on something they don't really get is to approach it from a very open, inviting, educational standpoint. Admittedly, you're not going to convince everyone. Not everyone is going to fully believe you, and that's just a fact of life. It may not be okay, but admittedly, just like you don't want to give Jehovah's Witness the time of day, want to slam the door in the face of every Mormon who knocks on your door, not everyone's going to subscribe to your new pronouns right away, and not everyone's going to fully understand what you mean when you say that you are demisexual, agendered, non-binary. They're not really going to have a freaking clue. So the best way to go about it is trying to educate, because if you think about it, if the only experience that they've had with genders and sexuality that do not confine to the normalities that we've been raised with, they're not going to have a very good perception of that concept. So rather than letting TUMBLR taint what you closely subscribe to, just take a minute to give them actual medical articles and actual anecdotals and actually help them understand what it is that you are and you love and you believe in, rather than taking the TUMBLR approach of attacking, because that doesn't work. And as we've seen, some of the ways that this has kind of played out is when people try to talk about their gender expressions and their sexuality, you see a lot of SJW cringe comps, which is not helping, and it sucks. It really, really does. So the TUMBLR effect has made it very, very difficult to talk about these terms, but keep that in mind when you are trying to explain them to your families, friends, loved ones. Just keep in mind that that's done some damage, and you may have to do a little more work in the education process. Alright, so what's my opinion? Well, personally, I identify as a bisexual, cisgendered female. Cisgendered, for those playing at home, are people who essentially fit all of the appearances and common traits of that gender. I am a girl. I look like a girl, and I like boys and girls. That's what that means. Now, my opinions on all of this, now that we've put that out of the way. While I do think it is awesome that we are able to learn about all these new genders and sexualities, we can be very open, we can disseminate great information on the internet and really talk about it candidly, I do think that it has also opened a door for Tumblr and other mediums to almost exploit this ability to negative effect. Now, I did say we might disagree. Now, while I do believe that there is validity to some of these terms that have come out, I do think non-binary is a very great way to describe someone that, you know, can really fluidly be androgynous and might one day want to be a chick and one day want to be a guy, or one day look like a guy but identify as a chick, and it kind of is a nice umbrella. But some of these new terms that are coming out are just preposterous. We don't need 72 different words when you have several words that could encompass the same thing. Similar to sexuality. I understand the concept of gray and demi and all of that. Asexual to me is a perfectly fine term. I get it. Aromantic is a perfectly fine term to me. I get that too. But once you veer into the more interesting realm of words, I almost have to question if there's not already a word that describes that, and you're just on like a scale of that pre-existing word, but have created a new word so you can very specifically identify to others where on that scale you are. And while that's fine, I don't know that we necessarily need a new word for it so much as a scale or like a varying range that can describe that. I mean, it might sound really selfish, and I may have to check my privilege, but I don't think everything needs a new word. Similar to certain species, I don't think we need 5 different words to describe the same hybrid. Sorry. But I also don't think we need new words for things that are already pretty well defined, or may not need words so much as a range or like a varying scale. So that's just my opinion on the subject. You may disagree, feel free to in the comments below, but that's where I stand on all of this. And yeah, it's okay if we disagree. I would love to hear from you guys, and until the next video, bye!